Hi, I'm Rabbi Avi Welcome. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Welcome to everyone here in New York and those around the world who are joining us on the Zoom broadcast. We are incredibly thrilled to welcome you all to our annual Jerome L. Stern Memorial Lecture. We're so grateful to the Stern family for supporting and making this lecture possible each year. Later in the evening, Rabbi Avi will respond to questions. So if you are here in person, please write your questions on the 3x5 index cards at your seat. And if you are watching online, please send your questions to the host through the chat, and they will be shared with us here. Jeffrey Stern is a model board member. He has a passionate commitment to Hadar's mission and to Israel, and he's a huge mensch. And it's my honor to invite him to come and speak a little bit about his father. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's one interpretation of the four children as... Thanks, Bob.
The mic is for the Zoom as opposed to for this room.
Oh, okay. There's one interpretation of the four children as four generations. And tonight we have four generations of Sterns here. And I think that my dad is looking down and smiling broadly. My mom, Jane Stern-LaBelle, is here. My brother, Ronnie Stern, is here. Lori, my daughter-in-law, is here. And Adam is here as well. So that is truly a chut, not even hamashulash. It's what does that mean? It's quadrupled, but it's a beautiful tradition. My dad's yortzeit was yesterday, but the truth is the reason why we have always done this lecture before Pesach is that my dad loved Passover. There was so much about it that he loved. He loved family, he loved discussion, he loved youth, he loved talking about the things that matter. And as every year, we've had a different speaker from Hadar, a different rabbi, which just shows you how deep the bench is here and what an amazing institution it is. And I think this year, there's none of us who are looking at this Passover and saying that this Passover won't be different from every other Passover. And I think one of the reasons is that, and my dad is a perfect example. He was one of the great generation. He was an optimist. Everything was upside with him. He saw youth as the future. And you could almost forget that sometimes Passover was a time of when we were concerned about our future. But he used to tell us stories about during World War II when he would watch his parents at night writing affidavits to get relatives out of Europe. Every time Israel was in peril, like the Six-Day War or the Yom Kippur War, I have memories seared into my mind of my dad, who was a businessman, not going to the office. All he did was try to help the Jewish people. And in a sense, as positive and as sunny as our sedurim have been so long, I think tonight, and I think at our seders this year, we're going to be looking at a different aspect of the seder, a leil shimurim, a time where we are concerned. And I think that the fact that Hadar is an institution that is raising the next generation of scholars, of engaged Jews that are able to address not only changes in society, changes in how we are evolving, but changes that are affecting us every day, gives great commentary on the beauty of Hadar, the importance of Hadar, and tonight is going to be, I'm sure, just another example of how Hadar enables us as students of the Torah to come to terms with times that we live in, issues that we might not have experienced before. So it's a privilege to honor my father, Yehuda Leib ben David Shmuel, tonight, and to share it with you. It's an absolute privilege to introduce Rabbi Avi Strausberg, who's the Senior Director of National Learning Initiatives at Hadar, based in Washington, D.C. She received her rabbinic ordination from Hebrew College in Boston and was a Wexner graduate fellow. And tonight we're going to be talking about children of believers, faith and fear on the first Pesach. So welcome, Rabbi Avi.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Such a tremendous honor to be here with you tonight, and especially to be teaching in your dad's memory and right after his yard site. We have a special treat. Before we dive into the learning, Rabbi Deborah Saxmans, my friend and colleague, has written a nigun specially for tonight, tailored to the material, and she's going to help us dive into that.
Great. Thank you, Rav Avi. So this is going to be actually an opportunity for us to all learn this nigun together. Even I'm still learning this nigun. It's really very new. So if you don't mind, if you could repeat after me, we'll learn it. Oh, ay da da la da na do. Oh, ay da la da da. One more time, listen. Oh, ay da la da na do. Oh, ay da la da. One more time. Oh, ay da la da. Next part. I did it da da. I did it by night on. Let's put that much together. Oh, I had a light, oh, yes. I had a light, oh, I had a light, oh, I did it night, oh, one more time. Oh, I da 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 oh, I da 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 oh, I da 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 oh, I did it oh. Next part. Hi, da 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 oh. Hi, oh, hi, da 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 oh. Hi, da 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 oh. Hi, da 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 oh. Let's try that much. Hi, oh, hi, da 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 oh. Hi, da 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 oh. One more time. Hi, oh, hi, da da oh. Hi, da 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 oh. Great. So often in Nagunim we climb up the ladder, and then we always have to climb back down, right? So the first half of that second section, we end it, hi, di-di-dun-di-di-do, at the very top of the ladder. And then how do we end it the second time? Hi, di-di-dun-di-di-di-do, which brings us back to the beginning. Oh, join us. Hi, da-da-di-di-di-do. Hi, da-da-di-di-di-do. Hi, da 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 hi, da 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 oh, hi, da 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 oh, hi, da 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 oh, hi, da 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 oh. Hi, da 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 oh, hi, oh, yes. Hi, da 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 Hai diridam bai dai dai home. Beautiful. So don't forget that. After we have a chance to make our way through Rav Avi's beautiful Torah, we'll map some of the midrashim back onto that niggin. So, Rav Avi.
I want to start just by actually thank you, Jeffrey. I had some thoughts about where I wanted to go, and actually Jeffrey was really, had an intuition early on that what we wanted to talk about is the way in which this Pesach was going to be different from some of our other Pesachs, and so I think you did shape the direction of this, and I'm grateful to your intuition there. The night of the first Pesach Seder was a night of fear and tremendous uncertainty. As the Israelites huddled in their homes, they waited to hear the screams of their neighbors as God struck the houses of every Egyptian family. However, the terrors of this night stemmed not only from the impending deaths of their neighbors, the Israelites were also still reeling from the deaths in their own communities. The Israelites had just come through Makat Choshech, the plague of darkness, a plague that, according to midrash, killed not only scores of Egyptians, but many Israelites as well. A midrash in Mechilta notes the curious word chamushim in the verse that describes God leading the Israelites out of Egypt and wonders about its meaning. Does it mean that God led them out armed, as tentatively translated by JPS, or does it carry a different meaning? You do have source sheets if you want to consult the source sheets at any point. So on the word chamushim, in this midrash we read, "Vechamushim alu," meaning, "Shelo alu imehen echad michamisha," that only one out of every 5 Israelites went out with them. That only one out of every 5 Israelites made it out of Egypt. Devar acher omrim echad michamishim. Another interpretation, they say that actually only one out of every 50 Israelites made it out from Egypt. Veyesh omrim echad mechamesh meot. And there are those that say actually it was only one out of every 500 Israelites made it out of Egypt. Rabbi Nahorai Omer ha'avodah, which is like his swearing by the temple service. Ve'lo echad mechameshet alafim. No, it was actually only one out of 5,000 Israelites made it out, which is to say that if you had a group of 5,000 Israelites in Egypt, 4,999, according to that account, did not survive Egypt and did not make it out. Ve'ematai metu. When did they die? B'yamei afela, in the days of the darkness. Shehayu mitzrim shru'in bechoshech, ve'Yisrael kovrim meitehem, ve'hodu ve'shibchu l'Shem. That in those days the Egyptians were huddled, they were immersed in the darkness, and the Israelites, they were burying their dead. And at the same time that they were burying their dead, they were giving praise and giving thanks to God. Shelo ra'u sonehen v'samchu beporanutan. And they were giving praise to God that their haters, their enemies, didn't see their disgrace, didn't have a chance to rejoice at their downfall. In the midrash, there's a debate about just how many Jews died in Egypt and how many made it out alive to commemorate that first Pesach. Some say 1 in 5 made it out, some say 1 in 50, some say 1 in 500. This would mean that out of every 500 Israelites, 499 died in Egypt. And according to the midrash, they all died during the plague of darkness. Under the veil of darkness, they were killed so that the Israelites, perhaps God, wouldn't be ashamed that they were not worthy of being saved. Rashi ultimately goes with the opinion that the word chamushim alu, means that only 1 in 5 made it out. This is by far the most conservative estimate, but this still means that 80% of the Israelites, 80% of their friends and family and community never made it out of Egypt. For me, this midrash completely reorients the experience of the first Pesach, the night when God passed over the houses of the Israelites, and the Israelites ate their korban Pesach, ate their sacrifice in terrified anticipation. They were not about to leave Egypt triumphant with God as their protector. They were a community reeling from loss, mourning mothers and fathers and children and neighbors. They were terrified themselves, surely uncertain whether they themselves would make it out and what the future would bring. As they ate their Korban Pesach, hearing the screams or awaiting the screams of the Egyptians, I imagine they wondered about the shape of redemption. Would they be saved? Who else would be lost? Would this God that took the lives of so much of their community be their protector? Would they one day know a life of calm, of peace, of certainty? In the words of the Torah, it was a leil shimurim, a night of vigil for all of the children of Israel, a night of watching and waiting, and I imagine mourning and grieving. Every year we read in the Haggadah one of the central commandments of the Seder. In every generation, a person is obligated to see themselves as if they came out of Egypt. Put another way, in every generation, a person is obligated to see themselves as if they were there for that first Pesach, sitting watch on that leil shimurim. We too were mourning those who died in the plague of darkness. We too were terrified for our futures. We too were wondering what the next day, the next month, the next year would bring. Would we be redeemed? And at what cost? This fear and uncertainty feels closer this year, perhaps, than in most other years. Like the Jewish slaves eating their Korban Pesach in Egypt, we'll be celebrating Pesach redemption and its miracles this year in the wake of a shattering October 7th calamity and a devastating war that has claimed too many Jewish lives, with 133 hostages still in captivity. And I think it's significant that the devastation in Egypt was universally pervasive. When the Jews mourned their losses, they did so at the same time that their Egyptian neighbors were doing the same. And I wonder what this might mean for us in our current situation when an overwhelming number of Palestinian civilians have paid the price for this war as well, when so much innocent blood soaks the land of both neighbors. We too are protecting ourselves through a war against an enemy that is leading to a catastrophic amount of death. We see scenes of Palestinians in Gaza that mirror the biblical image of the Egyptians. Ki ein bayit asher ein sham met. There was no household without someone who had died. This staggering price hangs over the redemptions of our ancestors in Egypt. It hangs over our heads as well. Does this whole picture, taken in its totality, not reinforce our sense of helplessness, instability, and despair? We wonder, what will the mourning bring the next month and the year? Will there be another war? Will we ever be redeemed? What will redemption look like? There is fear and loss and uncertainty and grief. We are back in the homes of the Israelites in Egypt, sitting watch on that first leil shimurim. When I place myself there on that night, it raises for me a number of questions about my faith. If I were there, would I have had the faith to follow Moshe into this completely unknown new life? Would I have trusted that this new God would protect me and care for me? Would I have jumped into a sea trusting that I would make it through? Would I have believed that there would be a better life on the other side, a life of calm and security? Bnei Yisrael were people of faith. I'm not sure I have quite the same faith. When God instructed Moshe to tell the people that God had taken note of their sorrow and that God would lead them out of Egypt, Moshe's first response was one of disbelief. He says, Hen lo ya'aminu li. They won't believe me. He didn't believe it was possible, and he didn't think the people would believe in him. His own disbelief causes him to question the belief of the Israelites. In a midrash, Moshe's lack of faith angers God. God threatens Moshe, saying, that rod that is in your hand, you should be struck by that rod for speaking ill of my people. God rushes to the defense of the Israelites and says, Hem ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. They are believers. They are children of believers. And God is proven right. When Moshe and Aharon first tell the people all that God instructed and perform the wonders as commanded, we read, Vaye'amen ha'am, the people believed. Just as God said, they were believers. And how do we know that they're also children of believers? The midrash answers, because Abraham was a believer. When God first promised Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars, we read, Ve'emen ba'Hashem. Abraham was a believer, and his children are believers. Moshe may have struggled with belief, but according to God, the Israelites did not. They were ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. Rabbi Clonius Kalman Shapira, the Eish Kodesh, who wrote from the Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust, brought this midrash in a drasha about faith. He wrote, Heim ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, hainu she'emunatam me'avotehem hu lehem, mipnei shehem b'nei ma'aminim. He says they are believers, the children of believers. He writes, their faith comes to them through their ancestors because they are the children of believers. Our capacity to believe, it seems, is independent of us. It's something we inherit just by virtue of being descendants of Abraham. Later in the same drasha, he writes that sometimes a person is so broken by their circumstances, there is so much darkness, that a person doesn't feel as if they believe. They lose faith. He writes, Aval gam az ein lomar bechas v'shalom eino ma'amin, ma'amin hu gam az rak she'eino margish. A person shouldn't say, even then, God forbid, that they don't believe. They believe. They just don't feel it. There's something that comforts me about this midrash and about Rabbi Shapira's teaching. Even in a moment in which we may be struggling with faith, he insists our faith is always there. We are always in the category of believers just by virtue of being Jewish. I imagine him writing this to those in the ghetto in Warsaw who are experiencing and witnessing horrors beyond imagination. People who had always believed, now struggling to hold onto faith. And Rabbi Shapiro tries to console them. Even if in this moment they don't feel as if they have access to their faith, they are believers. They are children of believers. The burden of faith is not on us alone. Our faith comes to us through our ancestors. Yet, I wonder, what does it mean to insist that we are believers even in a moment in which we don't feel like it? What good is that belief? What is the nature of that belief? How can I personally find my way toward belief in moments of darkness and uncertainty? Rebbe Nachman of Breslov taught a lot about struggles with faith and his own wrestlings with sadness and despair. Having experienced great suffering in his own life, he taught from personal experience. He knew firsthand what it meant to wrestle with faith and spoke to the different forms belief might take in moments of darkness. In Sichot Aran, a collection of teachings transcribed by his student Rabbi Natan, he teaches about the necessity of faith in a person's life. Rabbi Natan writes, Mi sheyesh lo emunah, chayav chayim. And mi she'ein lo emunah, chas v'shalom, chayav einam chayim. He says that someone who has faith, their life is a life. And someone who, God forbid, doesn't have faith, their life is not a life. He teaches definitively that a life without faith is not a life at all. In this teaching, he's also very clear about the definition of faith. Rabbi Natan writes that faith means believing that even when things are not going well, we trust that everything comes from God and therefore it must be good and that God will protect us in the end. For me, especially during a time of war, this is a definition of faith that I find challenging. I am unable to find my way into a theology in which I believe that everything comes from God, including this war, and therefore it must be good. I may be a child of a believer, but this is not a kind of faith with which I can identify. However, in other places, Rabbi Nachman offers a much more nuanced understanding of what it means to believe. One's belief, he teaches, might take very different forms. So in Likutei Eitzot, he writes, Ha'emunah toleh b'peh shel adam. Faith depends on the mouth of a person. Shetzrichim ledaber emunah b'peh, that a person needs to speak faith through the mouth. Kemo shekatuv, as it's written, Odi'a emunatcha befi. I will make known your faithfulness, your faith in the mouth. And for this reason, when a person has a fall from faith, God forbid, the advice for this person is that the person should speak words of faith through their mouth. That the person should say with a full mouth that they believe. This in itself, that the person is speaking through their mouth, words of faith, this in and of itself is an aspect of faith. And also through this, the person may come to merit a full and complete faith. Because faith depends on the mouth of a person. He teaches that sometimes when we are really struggling with faith, we may experience a disconnect between the language of faith and our own internal reality. When we feel as if we don't have faith, we either don't want to or can't say the words. How can we pray right now? How can we call ourselves believers when right now we don't believe? He answers that faith depends upon the mouth. Faith follows language. If we speak words of faith, if we say ani ma'amin, I believe, this will bring us to an emunah shlema, a full and complete faith. But he says something else as well. He says that even just speaking words of faith, this in and of itself is an aspect of faith. Even when we don't believe, if we continue to pray in the language of faith, if we testify to a faith that we don't feel, this in itself is a form of belief. If only we can say the words. This feels powerful to me. Maybe faith doesn't require us to believe in Rabbi Nachman's earlier definition of faith, a belief and trust in God that is secure and without doubt. Maybe we can be believers even when we don't believe, just by saying the words, by articulating a vision of a future, giving language to hope even when we doubt the reality of this future. Maybe this is what prayer offers us in a moment of war. It is saying the words that we very much want to be true, a continued insistence on the possibility of some better world and the refusal to accept the world as it is. Even as we struggle to believe that this is possible, if we say the words, this is an aspect of faith. It's a way into belief. I imagine the Israelites on that first Pesach wondering about redemption, wondering about a future of safety and security, a life beyond the confines of Egypt. Did they really believe it was possible? Did they trust in a God that had just wiped out so much of their community? Or did they will themselves into a belief, putting into words a hope for a tentative future not yet realized? V'ya'amen ha'am, the people believed. But what happens when we can't bring ourselves to say the words? When either words of faith feel so inauthentic that it feels like a lie, or perhaps we're not in an emotional space to say them at all, when we are too devastated, too paralyzed, too broken. When we are in a place that is a place beyond words, then all we need to do is just cry out. Rebbe Nachman writes, "V'ha'ikar ki ha'tza'aka belimbo be'atzma hu bechinat emunah." And the essence is that the crying out of one's heart, this in itself is an aspect of faith. Ki af al pi sheba'im alav kfirot gedolot v'kushiyot, even though all these doubts and questions and challenges are coming to a person, im kol zeh me'achar shetzo'ek al kol panim belibo, with all of this, the person still cries out with all of themselves in their heart. Bevadai adayin yesh bo nitzutz u'nekuda me'emunah ha'kedusha. Certainly, there is surely still this holy spark, this holy point of faith. Ki im chas v'shalom, because if God forbid, lo hayabo od shum nekuda me'emunah klal, if God forbid the person didn't have any holy spark, any point of faith at all, lo hayat tzo'ek klal, the person wouldn't cry out. Nimtza she'tza'aka be'atzma hu bechinat emunah. And we find that actually the crying out in and of itself, this is an aspect of faith. He goes on to say, he says, and also through this, through the crying out, the person comes to merit faith. That the crying out in itself is an aspect of faith. This is sort of an amazing phrase. It's just that the faith is like really small. It's like a great small. It's a big small. And it's through this crying out that a person can come to faith. Hainu leha'alot ulegadel emunah, to raise up and to grow the faith, ad sheyistalku hakushiyot mimenu, until all the doubts, until all the challenges leave them. Ve'afilu ime no zochel lezeh, and even if a person doesn't come to get to that place of faith, never gets rid of their doubts and questions, adayin afal pichen hatzaka batzma tov me'od. The crying out in and of itself is still a very good thing. Rebbe Nachman writes two things that are very important to me. First, he teaches powerfully that just crying out in and of itself is an aspect of faith. Were there not still a spark of faith in our hearts, we wouldn't cry out in the first place. The cry means that we are still in some sort of relationship to God. The fact that we cry out indicates that we are still with some hope, however buried that is there is someone who will respond to our cry. And then, as with the other text, he teaches that this cry will bring us to a full-fledged faith. I imagine the cry cracking something open in us, making space for that small point of faith to grow into something more. But even if we never get to that place of a full-fledged faith, he seems to say, that's okay. In fact, it's very good, because the cry in and of itself is very good and is an aspect of our faith. Rabbi Nachman makes space for a faith that comes out of brokenness, a faith that doesn't require a secure faith in God or God's goodness, a trust that everything will be okay, a faith that is rooted in sadness, in loss, in desperation, and in doubt. Faith here simply requires of us that we cry out, that we refuse to sink within ourselves and accept the world as it is. Rather, we must give rise to our frustration, our sorrow, and our anger, demanding outlet. This, too, is an aspect of faith. The Israelites, they cried out even before they knew God. They were believers. They were the children of believers. The Torah tells us, "V'ye'enchu b'nei Yisrael min avodah, v'yizaku v'ta'al shavatam el Elokim min avodah." The Israelites were groaning under the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help from the bondage rose up to God. If Rebbe Nachman is right, the cry itself reveals that there is still some spark of faith, a belief that we are in relationship with someone or something that cares. The Israelites were so broken from the years of slavery and oppression, from the cruelty of having their humanity denied to them, and at the brink they cry out, and God hears it. If we take their cry as faith, they had faith even before they knew of a God in which to believe. And then Rebbe Nachman teaches, sometimes we have fallen so far that we can't even cry out at all. There is no voice to cry. He teaches, "Shenit kalkel benofel emunah," when the faith is damaged and one falls from faith, ad she'ein mo'il afilu kol tza'aka, until such point that even audible crying out doesn't help. Shehu kol belo dibor, that this is a crying out that's without words. Azai tzrichim litzok min halev levad, then a person just needs to cry out from the heart. As it's written in Eichen, the book of Lamentations, Sa'ak libam el Hashem, the cry of their hearts toward God. Shehu tza'akata lev levad, that this is just the crying out of the heart, bli kol, without sound. As it's written in Tehillim, Mima makim karaticha Hashem, from the depths I called out to you, God. Me'umka deliba. What are the depths there that's referenced in Psalm 130? What are the ma'amakim? It's from the depths of the heart. During the first months of the war, Hadar and many Jewish communities across the world began a daily recitation of Psalm 130, Mima makim karaticha Hashem. From the depths I cried out to you. It was a time beyond words, just horror really, and pain and loss. It was a time of cries with sound and cries without sound, a pure crying out of the heart. Rabbi Nachman doesn't say it explicitly here, but I hear his voice echoing from his other Torah. I hear him saying, this too is an aspect of faith. Sometimes the silent cry of the heart is all we can manage, and this too is faith. This is all faith, he teaches. Sometimes faith means believing in God and believing that everything that comes from God is good and that redemption is possible. And sometimes it means just saying the words, continuing to pray even when it is hard to believe in a better future. It is continuing to cry out and choosing to be in relationship. And sometimes it is even the silent cry of our heart when words and prayer feel inaccessible. These are all aspects of what it means to believe, what it means to be the children of believers, like the Israelites on their first Pesach. In a modern midrash, scholar Rivka Lubitch connects the faith of the generation who came out of Egypt with our faith today. Just as in the midrash, God calls the Israelites believers, children of believers, Rivka Lubitch draws a straight line from our faith today to the faith of those of the first leil haseder. She calls us anshe emunah, people of faith. But she says, but the nature of that faith is different. She pushes the questions, what does it mean to believe, and in what do we have faith? She writes, Dor Rishon anshe emunah hayu. The first generation, they were people of faith. Umahi emunato shel Dor Rishon, what was the faith of the first generation? Emunah lishon emet. Their faith was connected to the word, to the root, emet, for truth. What was the nature of the faith of the first generation? Their faith was connected to emet. Their faith was one of truth in the way that the word amen, when we say amen is davening, is like saying, that's true for me also. What is emunah? It was simply emet. It was simply true. She continues, Sheru'u et Hashem ve'et niflotah b'yam suf, that they saw God and God's wonders at the Red Sea. V'yadu emet le'amitah she Hashem hu Elokim. And they knew with absolute certainty that God was God. V'hotzianu mimitzrayim, v'kara lanu et hayam, and that this God brought us out of Egypt and split for us the sea. In the same way that a woman sees her friend across the room and knows clear as day that her friend is alive and there. For the first generation, I'll just continue a little bit more with the midrash. Shene'emar, as it says in the verse, Vayir'u ha'am et Hashem, Ve'aminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo. As it says in the verse that the people saw God, they believed in God and in Moshe, God's servant. Hainu ra'u, hainu he'eminu, hainu yadu. Meaning that they saw, they believed, and they knew. For the first generation, this generation that witnessed God's miracles in Egypt, a river turned to blood, a sea split in two, their faith was simply one of objective truth. They witnessed God's hand in the world in the same way a person spots their friend across the room. They didn't need to make a leap of faith to believe. Rather, they saw, they believed, and they knew. God was present and real and true. What about the middle generation, she wonders? Dorot emtsayim afhem anshe emunah hayu. The middle generation, they were also people of faith. Ketzad, how could it be? This generation didn't see firsthand God and didn't experience God wonders. Rather, their faith, emunah, is connected to the word emun, which is about trust. That they would place their trust in the faith of their ancestors, that God was God. And this is the God that brought them out of Egypt and split for them at the sea. They placed trust in God and what God did for their ancestors according to their report, and what God in the future would do for them. This middle generation didn't experience God's miracles directly in the world. They didn't see a river turn to blood or a sea split in two. Their faith, their emunah, wasn't connected to the word emet, but rather to the word emun, to trust. They placed their trust in their ancestors who did experience God wonders directly, those who made it out of Egypt and crossed the sea. They trusted their stories, and they chose to place trust in their God, not only to believe in the wonders that God had already performed, but to trust that God would continue to intervene in the world. She continues, Ve'elu hayu omrim, and these are those that would say, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema be'biyat HaMashiach. These are the ones that would say, I believe in full faith in the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. Ve'af al pi sheyitmameha, even though the Mashiach tarries, is slow to come. Im kol ze echakelo b'chol yom sheyavo. In any event, I will wait for the Mashiach at all moments, at all days that the Mashiach should come. Even though perhaps they didn't experience God directly in this world, they trusted in God. And with perfect faith, they waited for a more perfected world. A world of justice, a world without war, a world of peace. ואף על פי שיתמהמה, עם כל זה אחכה לו בכל יום שיבוא. Even though the Mashiach tarries, with all of that, I wait every day that the Mashiach should come. What about the last generation? What of us? What of me? She writes, Dor acharon, avhu karui anshe emunah. This last generation, they were also called people of faith. Haketzad, how could it be? Hare dor ze me'arher achar emet, u'me'arher achar emunotayim shel avotav ve'imotav. This generation sort of, me'arher is like they ponder or think deeply about it. The translation is translated as questions. It's like this generation doesn't take anything on trust or as fact. This generation is always questioning and churning and thinking things over deeply, the faith of their ancestors. They don't trust anything. How could this generation also be believers? The last generation is a generation of skeptics, a generation that doesn't believe in unproven trust, that questions everything, that challenges everybody. What does faith look like for them? She answers, omnut. Rather, their faith is connected to the word omnut, to caretaking. Omnim hem et Elokim ve'et Torato. They care for God and God's Torah. Umigadlim umitabchim otam ad she'na'aseh Hashem le'Elokim ve'Torato na'aset le'Torah. And they raise God up and rear them until God becomes God and God's Torah becomes the Torah. For this generation, the word emunah is connected to the meaning of the same root, to care for. This generation's faith is not one of truth or trust, rather it's one of care. They care for God and God's Torah. They raise up God, and in doing so, God becomes God, and God's Torah becomes Torah. It is our love and our care that transforms Torah and gives God and Torah their proper place. Our faith is an act of caretaking. She quotes from Bamidbar, from the book of Numbers, as it's written, Ka'asher yisa omen et hayonek, as the caretaker, as the nursling cares for the baby, Shayonek noten emun be'omen, because the baby places trust in the omen, in the caretaker. The omen, the caretaker, omen et hayonek, cares for the baby, mitabcho umegadlo ve'ohavo, cares them and raises them and loves them. God seems to be the baby here, the yonek, who places emun, trust in us. And we, in turn, take care of God. We care for God. We raise God up. We love God. For this generation, faith is a choice. Faith is an act of love. I look at the world around me, and I find a lot of reasons to question my faith. I see catastrophic amounts of loss and suffering. I see injustice run rampant. I wonder, where is the God of the Torah who saw our suffering and heard our cry? Where is the God that split the sea and led us directly toward redemption? I do not feel like a person of faith. And then I think of my ancestors sitting watch on that first leil haseder, terrified of the night screams, grieving their friends and their families and their neighbors. Yet when the moment came, they were still willing to follow Moshe out. And I think of the midrash in which God defends their faith to Moshe and says they are believers, they are children of believers. And I think of the Eish Kodesh who taught that we too, like the Israelites, are children of believers. And I think of the midrash of Rivka Lubitch, in which she offers a different definition of faith, a faith that is not predicated on truth or even trust, a faith that is predicated on a choice to care for and to love. And I think, this is a faith I can handle. This is a faith that is my own. I want to close by offering one more vision of faith, a faith described by Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. I want to give a heads up and say, this is the moment if you want to ask a question. In the question and answer, you could start writing those questions down on the index cards and passing them towards the side. Glad you're ready, okay? He writes, I'm going to give us the whole poem in Hebrew, and then I'll read it in English. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה שברגע זה עומדים מיליוני בני אדם בצמתי דרכים, במפגשי רחובות, במדבריות, בג'ונגלים, והם מראים האחד לחברו היכן לפנות ומהי הדרך, ומה הכיוון, ומסבירים היכן לפנות ולאן לפנות, ואיך להגיע בדרך המהירה ביותר, ואיפה לשוב ולשאול אדם אחר. לשם, לא אלא רק בפנייה השנייה ימינה, ומשם שמאלה או ימינה, ליד הבית הלבן, ליד עץ האלון, והם מסבירים בקולות נרגשים, בהנפת ידיים, בתנועות ראש, לשם, לא, השם הזה, השם האחר, כמו בפולחן קדום. גם זו דת חדשה. אני מאמין באמונה שלמה שברגע זה. I believe with perfect faith that at this very moment, millions of human beings are standing at crossroads and intersections, in jungles and deserts, showing each other where to turn, what the right way is, which direction. They explain exactly where to go. What is the quickest way to get there? When to stop and ask again. There, over there, the second turn off, not the first, and from there, left or right, near the White House, by the oak tree. They explain with excited voices, with a wave of the hand and a nod of the head. There, over there, not that there, the other there, as in some ancient rite. This, too, is a new religion. I believe with perfect faith that at this very moment. Amichai's poem begins and ends with the famous language of Maimonides' 13 principles. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema. I believe with perfect faith. He opens and closes with the assertion, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema shebarega zeh. I believe with perfect faith at this moment. But his faith looks a little different than that of Maimonides. Rather, Amichai imagines a world, our world, in which we all stand at a crossroads. Maybe some of us know where we're going. Many of us are lost ourselves, and yet we're all eager to help each other get to where we need to be. We are gesticulating wildly. We are waving concernedly. We want to help our fellow lost traveler. This is a faith in the goodness of people, the desire to help each other, even as we all stand at the crossroads wondering which way to go next. There's something beautiful about imagining each of us in this room right now, and each of us in the Zoom sphere, each of us in our larger concentric circles of community, standing at our crossroads. And as we do so, we wave to each other. We point out the sign markers. We try to help each other along the way. Our community now stands at a crossroads. We are 8 months into a war, and we don't know what the next year or 2 years or 5 years will bring. We don't know what the cost of this war will be. We don't know the number of individual lives that will be lost and what this will do to our community. We don't know when redemption will come and what it will look like. It is the middle of the night, and we sit awake, waiting for news, waiting to hear, waiting for morning. We are our ancestors at the first seder, terrified, grieving, hopeful. Anachnu ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. We are believers. We are children of believers. Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema shebarega zeh. I believe in perfect faith at this moment. You can fill in the rest for yourself. I would love to hear your questions.
So we have one question. Can the 3 generations, truth, trust, care, be a metaphor for 3 types of Jews, 3 types of faith?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So Rivka Lubitsch brings in her midrash the way she lays it out. She lays it out in terms of the 3 generations. There's the Dor Rishon, there's the middle generation, and the Dor Acharon, the last generation. And it does sort of seem to me on first presentation it's as if we're moving through all of those. And maybe as the reader, we are more inclined to see ourselves in that Dor Acharon, in that last generation. Certainly I personally see myself in that last generation. But I also think it's important and it's possible to read the midrash as you don't have to place yourself in the last generation. It might be that actually you identify with the first generation, or you identify with the middle generation, or it might be sometimes there's three separate people in three separate faiths, or sometimes it's like, in this moment I'm a Dor Acharon, and in this moment I'm a Dor Rishon, and I'm moving between them. I think what she's offering us is not like boxing us into definitions of faith, but a way of sort of exploding out and expanding what might be possible as we think about our faith, and an opportunity for us to ourselves reflect on where we see each other in those generations at any given moment. Thank you for that question.
So first, just a comment from my life, which relates to this whole thing. When I was somewhere around 12, I remember waking up and thinking, if I woke up today and found out that there is no God, I would still believe in God. So there's very few things that you remember exactly what it was you said. That I've never forgotten. But here's a question in relation to something you were talking about with perfect faith. I'm wondering if the phrase emunah shlema, because shalem is full, complete, maybe refers more to a feeling of fullness than a perfect faith.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, so you're asking, there's different ways that we could understand the word shalem, or that modifying word of faith. And is it not that the faith has to be perfect, meaning without doubt or without question, but it's about, a sense of fullness, or I wonder, bringing our full selves to our faith, our full selves even with all of the questions and doubts and the life circumstances, really relating to our faith sort of in the fullness of our experience. I love that. I think that there's a lot we could do there to sort of thinking about actually what is that emunah shlema that we're striving for. Thank you for that.
Another one. What does it mean to have faith in the context of a universal spirituality?
Meaning, is this an in-person question or a Zoom question? Oh, good. So that means I can ask a follow-up question. Oh, good. So do you mean, can you say more about that?
Yeah. So if you don't have a God concept of a king God or an individual God or a God that's separate from you, but rather the oneness of everything, how do we talk about faith in this context?
Yeah, so I think that's a beautiful question, and I think that's part of what I'm trying to accomplish here. What I'm trying to think about is that for me, I feel like I started this project from a place of feeling like it was hard for me to identify with the language of ani ma'amin. That language I felt like it implied something that didn't feel authentic and true about my experience, and I feel like part of what I'm trying to explore here is maybe faith doesn't have to be faith in God and a God that is all good and all powerful and that everything will be okay in the end. But actually maybe faith can be about, faith can be about relationship to our ancestors, or faith can be about relationship to our community, or faith can be about a choice to love and care, or maybe faith can be, as in the Yehuda Amichai poem, faith can be like our relationship to our community, or a sense of universal connectedness, or faith in each other. And I think that this is just the beginning of exploring that. Like I'm trying to offer just like a couple of openings, and that's why it felt so important to me, sort of in a session that is mainly focused on faith and relationship to God, to end with the Yehuda Amichai poem, which is like, God's not in there. God's not in there at all. But what Yehuda Amichai wants to be saying is, Gam zo dat chadasha. This is a new religion. And so that I hear in that sort of like you can have, there can be something very spiritual and religious about a faith in which God's not actually a part of that scenario. And it can be about a lot of different things. And I would say the invitation here is that we have to sort of like articulate that language for ourselves. Like an invitation to do that. Thank you for that question.
We have a question from online, from on Zoom. How do we lead our seders this year with so much conflict and division within the Jewish community and within our families? What do we talk about?
Yeah.
Talk about the myths.
Yeah, so that's obviously the real question. Whose question is that? Yeah, I could say I don't have the answer to that. That's the question that we are all, if we are blessed to be coming together with many people and friends and families at our tables, in most families there are differences of opinions and divides that are very real, and that's a very real thing to have to deal with. So I guess I have two immediate thoughts on that, which is not a solution, which is I'm thinking about the end of Rivka Lubitsch's midrash, where faith is about omnut, faith is about caretaking. And I feel like the first response that I had to how do we do that is with a lot of love and care, a lot of love and care. And the second thing I wonder is, and this is very dangerous, feels very, very dangerous, but to the extent that the root of the Seder is about curiosity and asking questions, you might want to be I'm not saying ask all of the questions, but I don't know, approaching each other with a real, can we possibly approach each other across difference with a real love and curiosity, the same sense of curiosity and spirit of questioning that we're bringing to the rest of the Seder. But that's all to say this is a very real question and something we will each be navigating. Thank you for it. Okay. I'm getting different hand signals, like a baseball game. Okay, so I think I'm happy to stay around and would love to have more in the real person conversations. But No, she's gonna end with a little bit of song. Just figuring it out live on the spot. I'm super excited to invite back up Rav Deborah. Now the nigun that you learned at the beginning, now you get to hear the reveal of the words to really enrich the experience.
Thank you, Rav Avi. Beautiful. So I invite you to turn to the very last page in your packet. You'll see we have some nigunim that I hope you'll be joining us to sing downstairs after this, but we're going to bring back in some of our texts from tonight, Rebbe Nachman and Tehillim and Yehuda Amichai. So we'll join together. How does the nigun begin, if we can remember? Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, Odia emunatcha befi. Here we go. Oh, odia emunatcha. Oh, odia emunatcha befi. Odia. Oh, oh, dia emunatcha. Oh, dia emunatcha befi. Anu ma'aminim. Anu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Ashira ledor vador. Anu ma'aminim. Anu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Ashira ledor vador. Anu. Anu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Ashira ledor vador. Anu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Ashira ledor vador. Anidirai, Dirirandai Lairo Ashira Ashira Ledor Vador Ashira Ashira Ledor Vador Ashira Ledor Vador. Thank you for learning that.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Rav Avi. Thank you, Rav Deborah. Thank you to the Stern family, all 4 generations. And thank you to everyone who joined us here tonight and who has joined us on the Zoom. We hope you'll continue to learn with us through the spring and the summer in-person and in virtual classes. You can find them all at hadar.org, but I want to highlight in particular that we'll be counting the Omer together virtually. If you can imagine yourself past Pesach and into the Omer, we hope you'll join us for that. And that we are still accepting applications for the Halacha Intensive, which is in May. It's an incredible week. You can read about that also on the website. If you haven't found your way to the Hadar Pesach reader and you're here in person, we have them downstairs at the table, and virtually you can find that also on our website. And Hadar has amazing new books that are out, which you can also find here at the table tonight on your way out, and you can also find those online. If you are here in person, we are going to join together to sing. That will be all the way downstairs, so you can make your way to the elevator and go down to the bottom, or if you take the stairs, let's meet all the way downstairs at the bottom. Thank you so much.